My name is Anna Whitmore, and I don't let people in. Not anymore. Not since the hospital room. Not since the funeral. Not since I stood in a crowd of black coats and polite words and realized not a single person there actually knew me. They knew the version of me that showed up for meetings, replied to emails, and smiled on cue. The marketable version, the digestible one. But the real me? She left a long time ago. That's why I came here, to this crumbling, ivy-covered cottage, at the edge of nowhere, where the wind sounds like breathing and the trees talk in rustling tones. The town is 15 minutes away, but I don't go there much. I shop once a week, nod politely, and leave. No conversations, no connections. I came here to disappear, and so far I've done an excellent job. Or, I had, until last night. It was just past midnight when I first heard it. A sound so faint I thought I imagined it. I was sitting cross-legged on the couch, scribbling in my journal by candlelight like some self-styled recluse, when I heard the noise again. A soft whimper. At first I froze. Old instincts kicked in, the ones that scream, don't trust it, don't move, don't feel. Then it came again. A low, breathy whine. Someone, was outside my door. I stood slowly, heart thudding, and moved to the window. Rain streaked the glass and the wind howled like it had teeth. I couldn't see anything through the curtain of water, but I knew what I'd heard. Another whine. Closer now, not a cry for help. A plea. I backed away. No. I whispered to myself. No, no, no. I locked the door, not because I thought I was in danger, but because the part of me that still felt fragile didn't want to be seen. Not like this. Barefoot, messy-haired, wrapped in the same cardigan I'd worn for 3 days straight. I was tired of being the person people needed something from. Tired of performing. I pressed my back to the wall and waited. The sound came, again, softer this time, but steady. A quiet persistence that tugged at something I'd buried deep. I covered my ears and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the wind, the rain, and that soft, rhythmic whimper outside my door. I told myself it would be gone by morning. I told myself not to care. But my chest ached in that old, familiar way. The way it used to when I'd leave my office late and see a forgotten plant wilting on my desk. Or when I'd overhear my co-workers planning a birthday lunch I wasn't invited to. That ache that said, you don't belong, but you still want to. When the sun finally rose, I crept to the door and opened it just a crack. There. He was a dog, large, soaked, and still. He sat like a statue, right in front of the door, as if he had been waiting for me to open it all night long. His coat was matted with rain, and his paws were caked with mud. He didn't bark, didn't move, just looked at me. His eyes were the color of wet earth, dark, deep, and startlingly human. I stared at him through the crack in the door. My heart squeezed. "Why are you here?" I whispered. He tilted his head. I didn't open the door wider. Instead, I did what I always do when things get too close. I shut it, firmly, quietly. I rested my forehead against the wood and closed my eyes. He didn't bark, didn't scratch, didn't whine this time, but he didn't leave either. I made coffee, but it tasted like guilt. I cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the counters, rearranged the books on the shelf, all while pretending I couldn't feel the weight of his presence just beyond the door. By noon, I cracked. I peeked out again. He was still there, sitting in the exact same spot. Water dripped from his fur in slow, steady drops onto the porch. Something about that quiet loyalty broke me a little. I grabbed a bowl and filled it with water, opened the door just enough to slide it out, and placed it a few feet away from him. He didn't rush it. didn't move until I'd backed away. Then, slowly, he stood, wincing slightly, I noticed, and drank. After, he looked at the door again, and laid down, right there, on the porch, in the rain. He made no move to leave. I stood, behind the curtain, watching him. He wasn't just a stray. That much was obvious. His body had the lean muscle of a dog that had known both comfort and survival. There was a scar on his right leg. Thin, pale, old. His ears flicked at every sound. But he didn't flinch when I spoke through the door. "You're not mine," I said. "You don't belong here." He blinked slowly, like he disagreed. I spent the rest of the day writing, trying not to check the window every 5 minutes. At sunset, I cracked the door again. He was still there, curled, in on himself, tail tucked, but alert, watching. I didn't offer food. I didn't speak. I just closed the door again. But when night fell, and the house went quiet, I couldn't stop listening. He was still there, waiting. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm return in waves. The rain picked up again, and thunder rumbled far away. I knew the porch would flood if it kept up. I knew he'd be cold. Still, I didn't open the door. I curled into myself, pillow clutched to my chest. "You don't have space for this," I told myself. "You barely have space for you." But deep down, I knew. I wasn't afraid of the dog. I was afraid of what letting him in would mean. That something could still need me. That something could still stay. That I might not be as numb as I pretended to be. By 3 a.m., I got up. I padded to the door barefoot, the floor cold beneath my feet. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I didn't turn it. I just stood there, listening, waiting. And on the other side, so did he. Every time I looked out, he was still. There by the time I opened the door the next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was washed in that faint lavender light that only appears after a storm has emptied the world. The porch boards were slick with dew, and the air smelled like pine needles and wet earth. And there, exactly where he had been before, was the dog, still waiting. He lifted his head slowly as I stepped out. His body uncurled with stiff, deliberate movements, like he hadn't slept at all. His fur was still damp, but his eyes were steady, warm. Watching me, not with desperation, but with expectation. As if I owed him nothing. And yet, he knew I would come. "I thought you'd leave," I whispered. His tail thumped once. I crossed my arms over my chest. "You've got nowhere else to go, huh?" He didn't answer, of course, just stared. I sighed and stepped back inside, only to return a minute later with another bowl. This one filled with scrambled eggs and dry cereal. It was all I had on hand. I set it down at the far end of the porch and backed away. He hesitated, then moved toward the bowl with the kind of grace that felt oddly polite. He didn't devour the food like a starving stray. He ate carefully, almost gently. No growling. No gulping, just quiet gratitude. I leaned against the doorframe, watching him. His fur, up close, was thick and coarse, mostly dark brown with flecks of gray around the ears and muzzle. A dog well into adulthood, maybe older. Strong, but lean. Weathered. "Someone must have loved you once," I murmured. "You weren't born out here." He paused between bites and looked up at me, as if to say, "And you weren't born to be alone." I flinched at the thought. When he finished, he sat again, not asking for more, not pushing closer. Just there, the same way he'd been all night. Stepped inside and shut the door, pressing my back against it. What was I doing? This wasn't part of the plan. I had come here to heal, to write, to forget. Not to take in strays, not even the quiet ones who waited in silence and never asked for anything. But he didn't leave. Not that day. Not that night. Every time I looked out, between paragraphs, between thoughts, between one tea kettle whistle, and the next, he was there, either sitting upright, watching the door, or curled up in the same spot on the porch, head resting on his front paws, still as stone. By evening, I started talking to him through the screen door. "You're not very good at boundaries," I told him while I chopped vegetables for dinner. He blinked. I dropped the knife on the cutting board and walked over, squinting at him through the mesh. "Do you think I'm going to let you in just because you waited long enough?" He didn't move. I'm not some lonely fool who falls for the first creature that shows up with sad eyes and muddy paws. He wagged his tail. I closed the curtain and muttered, "Don't make this harder than it already is." But that night, when I went to bed, I didn't turn off the porch light. I left it glowing soft and golden, casting a warm halo around the silhouette curled on the wood outside. And in the middle of the night, when I woke gasping from a dream I couldn't remember, I padded barefoot to the door. He was there. He looked, up the second I appeared. Neither of us moved. Neither of us made a sound. But in that stillness, something softened in me. Something I didn't know I'd sealed shut. By the third day, I gave him a name. Not out loud, not formally. Just in my mind. Max. It came to me unprompted, like a memory that didn't quite belong to me. Max. It felt right. I said it softly, just once, while refilling the water bowl. Max. His ears perked, and he tilted his head. My breath caught. "You do have a name, don't you?" I asked. "Someone must have called you something once." He didn't come closer, but he didn't turn away either. Later that afternoon, I tried to work. I sat at the small desk by the window, laptop open, cursor, blinking in an empty document. The page stared back at me like it expected something brilliant. I had nothing. Every time I glanced up, there he was, Max, stretched out on the porch like he belonged there. Like this was his house, and I was the guest. I tried to ignore him. I really did. But the truth was, he didn't feel like a distraction. He felt like a mirror. Every time I looked out and saw him still there, my chest tightened with something I couldn't quite explain. A mix of guilt and comfort, like he was waiting for me to catch up to myself. By evening, the guilt got the better of me. I opened the door just wide enough to toss out a folded blanket. Max didn't flinch. He watched me lay it down, then slowly walked over, sniffed it, and circled once before curling up on it, like he'd been waiting for an invitation. I sat cross-legged inside the doorway, my back against the frame. "You're not making this easy," I said. He rested his head on his paws, eyelids fluttering with exhaustion. "You know, I came here because I wanted to be alone." He didn't move. I thought I needed silence, but I think what I really needed was for someone to wait for me. Quietly, without asking me to be anything, without asking me to fix anything. I laughed under my breath. "And now look, you're out here doing exactly that." I stayed there a while, just watching him sleep. He looked safe. And somehow, so did I. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if Max would still be here in a week, or if someone might come looking for him, or if he'd simply vanish like a ghost once he felt he'd done his job. But I did know one thing. Every time I looked out, he was still there, and a part of me was starting to hope he'd never leave. I finally opened the door. It happened on the 6th morning. The sky was pale and shivering with frost. The kind of morning that smells like breath and frozen soil, where even the wind tiptoes. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, holding a steaming mug of tea, staring out through the fogged window. And there he was. Still. Max lay curled up on the blanket I had tossed him days ago, his fur now clean from the rain, but dusted with the glitter of frost. His body rose and fell gently with sleep. His tail twitched once in a dream, and his ears, always alert, flicked at the distant sound of a raven calling through the trees. It was too cold now. Too cruel. Something cracked in me. Not like glass shattering, but like ice finally melting. I couldn't leave him out there another day. I didn't dress. I didn't overthink it. I simply walked to the door and opened it. Wide. The sudden creak startled him. He jerked his head up, eyes blinking against the morning light. I stood in the doorway, arms folded across my thin sweater, steam rising from the mug in my hands. "Come in, Max," I said softly. He hesitated. I expected him to leap inside, tail wagging, tongue out, the way dogs in movies do. But he didn't. He stood slowly, eyes locked with mine, and took one careful step forward, then another, and another, like he was giving me time to change my mind, time to breathe, time to mean it. By the time his paws crossed the threshold, my breath caught in, my throat. He was inside. He sniffed the air cautiously, his nails clicking gently on the wood floor. His head turned slowly, studying the small kitchen, the couch with the blanket still tangled from the night before, the fire crackling low in the stove. He didn't rush, didn't explore. He just settled, right there beside the doorway, his body curled tight, tail tucked close. He didn't ask for more than that, just the space, just the warmth, just in. I didn't know what to do. So I sat down on the floor across from him, my tea growing cold in my hands, and whispered, "Why did that feel like a ceremony?" Max didn't answer, but his eyes softened. "You've waited so long for this moment," I said, "and now that you're here, I don't know if I deserve it." He let out a slow breath and laid his chin on his front paws. I reached out. Just a little. My fingers hovered above his head. "Can I?" His ears flicked forward. Slowly, gently, I ran my hand over the top of his head. His fur was coarse in places, soft in others. There were small notches in his ears, signs of an old life I would never fully understand. But beneath my touch, he relaxed, as if it was never a question of whether he'd trust me. It was a question of when I'd trust myself. That day, I found a rhythm. Max slept most of the morning near the fire. I moved slowly around him, as if afraid to disturb the balance we had both fought so hard to find. I made toast and eggs. He lifted his head at the smell but didn't beg. I offered him a piece anyway. He took it delicately from my hand. When the sun rose higher, I opened the back door and stepped out into the frozen grass. He followed. Not because I called him. I never had to. But because that was our rhythm now. The two of us, side by side. I didn't use a leash. He didn't need one. We wandered through the bare woods, past the old stone wall that once marked someone's forgotten boundary. I told him about the hawks that used to nest here, about the neighbors' wild goats that sometimes wandered too far. I told him about the quiet, about how I used to hate it, and now, how I needed it. He listened the way only dogs can, with his whole body, his ears forward, his eyes on mine, not interrupting, not advising, just holding the space for my voice. And I spoke. I told him about the city, the burnout, the failed engagement I still couldn't name aloud, the hospital rooms, the way I woke up one day and realized I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror anymore. Max didn't judge. He just nudged my hand with his nose when I paused, as if saying, "Keep going, I'm still here." That night, he didn't wait by the salle. Cure. He walked in beside me like he'd always lived here. I made dinner, soup and bread, and gave him his own plate of boiled chicken and rice. He ate it slowly, politely, like he was used to sharing. I sat beside him afterward, legs folded, hand resting on his back. The fire cracked and hissed, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be okay. I just was. Later, when the wind howled against the windows, I opened the bedroom door without a word. Max followed. He didn't climb onto the bed, not right away. He curled up at the foot, head resting on his front paws, watching me as I pulled the covers up to my chin. "Is this okay?" I asked. He blinked. That was answer enough. But somewhere around midnight, when the storm got worse and the wind whistled, through the old chimney, I felt the bed shift. I opened my eyes. Max had climbed up, quietly, and laid down beside me. Close, but not touching. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. I turned my face into the pillow and whispered, "I didn't let you in because I felt sorry for you." He didn't move. "I let you in because you waited. You saw me, and you waited." A single tear slid down my cheek. "You made me feel like I was worth waiting for." His head nudged my shoulder, gentle and brief. Then he curled beside me, warm and still. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night. Then he disappeared. I had forgotten what silence felt like without him. It started like any other morning. Pale light filtered through the curtains. Birdsong hummed softly outside the window, and the usual creaks of the old cottage settled around me like a familiar song. But something was wrong. The bed was too still. The weight that had become second. Nature, the quiet warmth of Max curled at my feet, was missing. "Max," I called, still half asleep, pushing the blanket off my legs. No sound. I sat up. The bedroom door was ajar, as always. The living room was empty. His bowl was untouched. The blanket by the fire hadn't been slept on. I walked to the back door, hoping he'd be in the yard. Max? Nothing. I stepped outside barefoot, the frost biting at my skin. The woods were silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that presses into your ribs like something watching. I turned in a slow circle. No paw prints in the frost. No warm spot on the porch. No sign at all that he'd even been here. Panic rose up in my throat like smoke. He never wandered far. He never left without checking in. Even in the earliest days, he'd waited for me. Always waited. And now he was. Just gone. I rushed inside, threw on boots and a jacket, and grabbed the flashlight out of the drawer. The sun had barely crested the trees, and the woods were still heavy with shadows. I tried to stay calm. "Maybe he chased a rabbit," muttered aloud, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Or maybe he heard something in the woods. Maybe he'll be back by the time I—" A sound behind me made me spin. Just the wind. My heart pounded in my chest like it was trying to escape. I stepped off the porch and into the trees. The path we always took was still visible, the faint depression of our shared walks, the pressed grass where he liked to roll. I followed it with slow, measured steps, calling his name every few feet. "Max! Come on, boy. Where are you?" Nothing. I made it to the old stone wall. Still no sign, no paw prints, No rustle of movement in the underbrush. Something didn't feel right, and the worst part was, I knew it. It wasn't just that Max was gone. It was how he was gone. No warning, no sound, no scent. He had vanished like smoke. By mid-morning, I had searched every inch of the nearby woods, the field beyond the cottage, and the overgrown garden behind the shed. I knocked on the neighbor's door, a retired farmer named Bill who lived a half-mile up the road, and asked if he'd seen a big brown dog pass through. "Nope," Bill said with a scratch of his beard. "Haven't seen a thing." "Everything all right?" I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just checking." He narrowed his eyes. "You look a little pale, Anna." "I'm fine," I lied. "Thanks." I didn't go home right away. I walked the road in both directions, calling, searching, hoping. But there was nothing. No collar to call the vet about. No microchip, no tag, no posted photo from a missing owner. Max had never come with a past, and now he had left without a trace. When I finally returned to the cottage, something inside me had gone hollow. The house felt wrong, too empty. The silence was no longer peaceful. It echoed. I stood in the doorway and whispered, "What happened?" No answer. I sat on the floor beside the fire, staring at his blanket like it might move. The hours crawled. Afternoon melted into evening, and evening into a long, stretched-out dusk that seemed to hold its breath. I tried to eat, but nothing tasted right. I tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. My chest ached in a way I hadn't felt in years. Abandonment. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that happens when something you've learned to depend on simply isn't there anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I left the porch light on. I left the back door slightly open. I even laid his blanket out neatly beside the fire. But Max didn't come home. I told myself not to cry. I cried anyway. The next morning came slow and gray, dragging, with it a fog that clung to the trees like a ghost. I sat on the steps outside, wrapped in a wool blanket, holding a thermos of cold tea. My heart felt brittle. I stared at the edge of the woods until my eyes burned. Where are you? Had he been hurt? Had someone taken him? Had he simply decided I wasn't enough? No. That wasn't Max. Max didn't leave. He waited. He always waited. And now he was gone. By the third day, I stopped pretending I was okay. I stopped making food, stopped pretending I didn't check the porch every 10 minutes. The house fell into a kind of stillness I hadn't known since before he arrived. A hollow quiet that made the floorboards seem louder and the shadows seem longer. I missed him. Not like a pet. Not like a stray. Like something that had seen me and stayed anyway. Like someone who waited outside my door in the rain, just to be near me. And now, nothing. I sat curled on the couch, knees to my chest, staring at the front door. "Please come." "Back," I whispered. "Please." No answer, just the wind. That night, the storm returned. Rain battered the windows. Thunder cracked overhead. I stared at the door so long I began to imagine I heard things. Scratching, a whine, a paw step. But every time I looked, nothing. Until a shadow. Right before midnight, I rose from the couch. Breath caught in my throat. The porch light flickered. Once, then steadied. And there, just beyond the glass, was a shape. I ran to the door and flung it open so hard it nearly tore from the hinges. He was there. Max. Soaked, shivering, muddy to his chest. But there. He looked up at me with those deep amber eyes like he'd never left, like he'd just been waiting for me this time. "Max!" I dropped to my knees on the porch, wrapping my arms around his neck. "Where were you?" I looked everywhere. He leaned into me, pressing his weight into my chest, as if to say, "I'm here now. That's all that matters." I buried my face in his wet fur and held him like I would never let go again. "You waited all night, again," I whispered. His tail thumped once, and I knew, without a doubt, wherever he had gone, whatever had happened, Max had chosen to come back, to me. He waited all night. Outside my door. I didn't let him out of my sight for 2 days. Max was weak when he returned, his paw pads scraped raw, a gash along his flank half-healed and crusted with mud. I cleaned the wound as best I could with warm water and iodine, whispering soothing words while his body trembled under my touch. He didn't resist, not once. He let me help him. And something about that, about being trusted so deeply, it unraveled me. I laid towels out by the fire. I slept beside him on the rug that night, listening to his breathing, half afraid it would stop if I turned away. But he healed quickly, almost unnaturally so. By the 3rd morning, he was back on his feet, trailing me from room to room with soft paws and eyes that missed nothing. But he never told me where he'd been, and I didn't ask. Some truths belong to the silent. Still, something in him had changed, and in me too. The air between us was charged now, not tense, but heavy with something unspoken. I felt it every time his eyes met mine, every time he lingered by the door as if listening for something I couldn't hear. And then the scratching started. It was late one night, past midnight, when Max suddenly rose from the foot of the bed and crept to the window. His ears stiffened, his body froze. "Max," I whispered, pushing myself upright. He didn't look at me, he just growled, low and quiet, the first real growl I'd ever heard from him. I rushed to the window and looked out. Nothing, but he stayed there, growling, and then scratching. Faint. At first, then sharper, not on the porch, beyond it, near the woods. It wasn't the sound of branches in the wind. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Max turned and bolted toward the front door. "Wait." I threw on my boots and coat and followed him out into the cold. The wind had stilled. The forest stood dark and still like it was watching. Max stood rigid at the edge of the porch, eyes locked on the tree line. "Do you see something?" I asked breathlessly. He took one step forward, then another, then he ran. I didn't think. I chased. We plunged into the woods, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows like a blade. My heart pounded. My breath came in clouds, but Max moved like he was pulled by something. A sound, a scent, a memory. "Max!" I shouted. "Stop! Please!" And then I heard it. A whine. Not Max. Higher, younger. My feet slipped on wet moss as I caught up to him, breathless and cold. He stood over a thick patch of brambles, barking now, sharp, focused. Something moved beneath. I dropped to my knees and pushed the branches aside. It was a puppy. No older than a few months. Thin. Shivering. Trapped. Oh my God. I reached, in, ignoring the thorns, and gently pulled the pup into my arms. It whimpered, pressing against me like I was the first warmth it had known in days. Max leaned in and sniffed it, tail wagging gently. He had known. I stared at him, heart aching. "This is where you went, isn't it? This is what you found." He licked the pup once, then looked up at me. And in that look, I understood everything. Max hadn't been lost. He had been searching. For this. For her. this little creature that looked up at me with frightened eyes and an unspoken question. We walked, back together in silence. Max at my side, the puppy warm against my chest. Back at the cottage, I wrapped the pup in a blanket and set her by the fire. She ate 3 bowls of food in 10 minutes. Max watched her the entire time, his tail thumping slowly. Not possessive, protective. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched them instead, the 2 of them, curled together like they'd always belonged. Something inside me shifted. This house, once a tomb for my grief, had become something else. A haven, a home, and Max. Max had brought me here for a reason. The next few days passed in a blur of healing, feeding, and slow introductions. The puppy, now named Nova, after the stars that burn brightest right before they fade, followed Max everywhere. He taught her how to sit, how to stay, how to walk in rhythm with the world. And I began to live again. Not just exist. Live. Found myself laughing out loud for the first time in months, singing softly while I cleaned. Writing again, real writing. Stories with heart and grit and characters who waited at doors and came back when it mattered most. But it was the nights that stayed with me most. Especially the last one. It was clear, cold, quiet. Max sat by the door again, just like he had the first time I saw him. Nova was asleep, curled into the hollow of his side. I walked over and knelt beside him. "You waited for me," I whispered. "You waited outside my door until I was brave enough to open it." He looked at me. "I thought I was saving you," I said. "But you were saving me, weren't you?" He blinked slowly. And in that silence, I felt my chest tighten, not with grief, with awe. Then, he stood. Nova stirred, but didn't rise. Max walked to the front door and looked at me. "Do you want to go out?" I asked. He barked once, soft and short. I opened the door. He stepped onto the porch and stared into the woods. I followed. "Where are you going?" He turned to me, just once, and then walked down the steps. Not running, not disappearing, just walking. I wanted to follow. I took one step, then stopped, because suddenly, I understood. This was goodbye. Max had never been mine to keep. He had come to find me, to fix something I didn't even know was broken, to teach me how to open the door again, to love again, and now, his work was done. Tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking. He turned one last time, tail wagging gently. Then he vanished into the trees. I stood there for a long time. Nova padded up behind me, curling against my leg. The door was still open, but now I wasn't waiting anymore.